The wind moves low across the plains of Verdun, brushing through grass that hides more than just roots. The land is scarred, cratered, and quiet in a way that feels unnatural. At dusk, fog coils through the forested ridgelines, like smoke from a long-dead fire, and the silence carries a weight that presses against the chest. It is a silence that listens back. Verdun, in the northeastern part of France, appears to rest. Fields once soaked in blood now hold memorial stones and wooden signs for tourists. But beneath the surface lies a history too deep to bury. For nearly a year during the First World War, this land became one of the deadliest places in human history. More than 700,000 men were killed, wounded, or simply disappeared into the mud. Artillery fire thundered across the sky for 300 days. Bodies were buried where they fell, and some were never found. Today, the Douaumont Ossuary stands like a sentinel above the battlefield. Its tall stone tower casts a long shadow over the surrounding graves. Inside, the bones of over 130,000 unknown soldiers are sealed behind glass. Their names were lost, but their presence remains. Visitors describe cold gusts in still air, the sound of boots on marble when no one is walking, or faint voices that echo when the halls are empty. Some call Verdun a monument to courage. Others say it is a wound that never healed. This documentary will take you through the haunted corridors of the Douaumont Ossuary and across the fog-covered battlefields where soldiers still scream in the night. Their stories are not over. Their footsteps still echo, and in the silence of Verdun, the dead have never stopped marching. Verdun was not chosen at random. In 1916, it became the focus of one of the most brutal campaigns of the First World War. German forces launched an offensive here with a single intent: to bleed France dry. What followed was a battle of attrition unlike anything seen before. The terrain, marked by dense forests and limestone ridges, was turned into a churning inferno of artillery, gas, and ceaseless gunfire. The hills were shelled until they no longer resembled hills. Trees splintered, trenches flooded. Men drowned in mud before ever seeing the enemy. The centerpiece of this suffering was Fort Douaumont, a massive concrete structure built decades earlier to defend the frontier. Early in the campaign, it fell to German troops without a single shot fired. In a cruel twist of irony, the strongest fortress on the line was taken because it had been poorly manned. What followed was months of bloodshed as the French fought desperately to retake it. Inside the fort, soldiers lived and died in darkness. Its corridors became tombs, filled with smoke, screams, and silence. In May of 1916, a French artillery shell struck the fort and detonated an internal ammunition store. Hundreds of German soldiers were incinerated in a single moment. The bodies were never recovered. To this day, parts of the fort are sealed. What lies behind those walls has not been disturbed in over a century. The fields around the fort fared no better. Waves of soldiers were ordered over the top, only to be torn apart by machine gun fire within minutes. Men were reduced to names on paper, and soon not even that. Rain turned the soil into mire. Shells churned corpses into the earth. At night, the air filled with moaning from the wounded who could not be rescued. Verdun never forgot. The dead here were not merely buried, they were absorbed. When the Douaumont Ossuary was constructed after the war, remains were collected from across the battlefield. Bones, uniforms, and shattered helmets were gathered without names. They now rest behind stone walls and glass panels, hundreds of thousands strong, waiting in silence. Marc Leclerc has worked as a night security officer at the Douaumont Ossuary for nearly 9 years. A quiet man in his 60s, Marc does not believe in folklore. He is methodical, punctual, and known by colleagues for his strict routines. But when asked about the nights alone inside the ossuary, Marc's voice lowers. He no longer works past sundown. It was around 2:30 in the morning, he recalls, staring at the floor. Winter. I was walking the north corridor, past the 6th memorial panel. No one else was inside. The temperature had dropped sharply, he says, and his breath fogged with every step. He had just turned off the lights in the west wing when he heard its footsteps. Crisp, steady, and pacing, boots on stone. At first, Mark thought a tourist had hidden inside and was attempting a prank. He called out. No answer. The footsteps continued, stopping abruptly when he reached the corridor junction. Then came a whisper, faint but clear, carried by a current of cold air that made his skin crawl. Feuer frei, it said. Mark froze. The phrase, German for open fire, echoed through the dark hall like a command. It was not a recording. It was right behind me. I felt heat on my neck, like someone had exhaled, he says. His flashlight blinked out at that moment, leaving him in total darkness. The air felt suddenly dense, as though the stone walls were pressing in. He could not move. His limbs refused to obey. For nearly half a minute, he stood trapped in the silence, heart pounding, until the flashlight sputtered back on by itself. The hallway was empty. He left that night before his shift ended and never returned for night duty. They are not angry, he says, but they are still there, and they do not want to be forgotten. Today, Mark works only during daylight hours and avoids the north corridor entirely. Others have reported similar incidents: cold pockets, disembodied voices, whispers in German and French, but few speak openly. At Verdun, silence is a kind of respect, but sometimes the dead do not allow it. They call him the Captain in the Mist. Soldiers stationed at nearby military posts have reported sightings for decades, and tourists wandering the edge of Fort Douaumont often leave with stories they cannot fully explain. Always seen just after dawn or in the thick of evening fog, the figure appears for only moments. He is tall, broad-shouldered, his uniform tattered and damp, a rifle clutched tightly in one hand. His face is partially obscured, as if the mist itself refuses to let it be seen clearly. Local historian Isabel Giraud believes the apparition is Captain Alias Ward, a British volunteer officer who led a mixed Allied platoon during the summer of 1916. His unit was ordered into a suicide charge during a failed counter-offensive east of the fort. Eyewitness reports from surviving soldiers describe Ward refusing to retreat even as artillery decimated his men. He was last seen shouting orders over the sound of exploding shells, pushing forward alone through the haze of battle. His body was never recovered. Visitors describe an overwhelming sense of confusion when they see him. One account from a Canadian student in 2015 recalls walking the trench path near the collapsed southern edge of Fort Douaumont. He saw a man in uniform pacing the trench line, turning sharply to face him before vanishing mid-step. "I didn't feel fear," he said. "I felt like I was being inspected, like he was checking I belonged there." There is no aggression in the captain's appearance. Instead, witnesses report feeling compelled to follow him, drawn by something they can't explain. Some have described the sensation as a magnetic pull, others as an emotional weight, like walking into someone else's memory. When they snap out of it, the fog has deepened and the figure is gone. Psychics who have visited Verdun say the captain is not hunting, he is searching. They believe he is still trying to locate his men, still attempting to lead them to safety, unaware that the war has long ended. He remains locked in that final order, bound by duty, walking the trench line until someone calls him home. In the summer of 2018, Angela Morton traveled to Verdun alone. A history teacher from Yorkshire with a deep interest in World War I, she had studied the Battle of Verdun for years but had never walked the ground where it happened. Her plan was simple: visit the memorial sites, take notes, and return with photographs for her classroom lectures. She arrived early, intending to catch the morning light at Fort Douaumont. What happened instead would leave her shaken long after the trip ended. That morning, the air was unusually heavy, with a low fog rolling in faster than expected. Angela began her walk near the outer trenches east of the fort, following a marked path that looped around the perimeter. About halfway through, she took a wrong turn. The signs were partially obscured by overgrowth, and without realizing it, she left the trail. I heard this sound, she recalls. It was faint at first, like music. Bagpipes, I think, or something like it. Confused, she moved toward the noise, thinking perhaps another visitor had brought a speaker. But the fog thickened, swallowing the trees and dimming the morning light. Then came the scream. It was not a single voice. It was a chorus. Dozens, maybe more, rising in one terrible, prolonged wail that seemed to bleed from the soil. Angela dropped to her knees, clutching her ears. She remembers the pressure in her chest, as though the air had turned to water. All around her, she saw shapes forming in the mist, human forms, standing, some reaching toward the sky, others staring straight ahead with expressions twisted in agony. I saw faces, she said, not clear, but there were eyes, and they looked at me like they remembered me. Within seconds, the shapes dissolved. The fog thinned, and the forest returned to silence. Angela scrambled back to the main path, sobbing. She finished her trip early and returned home. The photographs she took that morning were blank, overexposed, or corrupted. Today, she avoids discussing Verdun in her lectures. It wasn't just fear, she says. It was grief, alive, like the ground had something it wanted me to feel. In Verdun, the dead are not simply remembered. They are spoken of as if they still occupy the land. Among the locals, there is a belief that the battlefield itself is wounded, a spiritual rupture that has never closed. The older residents call it la terre qui pleure, meaning the earth that cries. According to regional folklore, the soil absorbs emotion, holding on to suffering like a living thing. It is said that in places where too many died too quickly, the land cannot settle. It remembers. Some believe that the Douaumont Ossuary was built directly over such a wound. During construction in the 1920s, workers reported hearing voices beneath the foundation. One crew member reportedly left the project after saying he heard a voice call his name from inside a pile of recovered bones. The structure itself is designed as a resting place, but many psychics argue that instead of calming the dead, it concentrated their presence. A local spiritualist, Claire Marnier, has led several private ceremonies in the area over the past decade. Her intent was to offer release to the trapped souls, to acknowledge their pain. But she says each time, the responses became more intense. On her last visit, she left abruptly, saying, "There is something unfinished. They do not want peace. They want to be seen." The theory shared among mediums is not one of malevolence, but of identity. These spirits do not linger to torment. They remain because they were never counted. No name, no burial, no end. In Verdun, remembrance alone is not enough. Within the stone walls of the Douaumont Ossuary lies a haunting that is softer in sound but no less disturbing. Known among staff and paranormal researchers as the Whispering Wall, this phenomenon is unlike the visual sightings near the fort or the violent echoes on the battlefield. Here, the dead speak not through screams or visions, but through hushed fragments of language that emerge when no one else is around. The corridor in question stretches along the northern end of the ossuary, lined with memorial panels and glass viewing points where bones are faintly visible behind frosted windows. It is here that countless visitors have stopped mid-step, frozen by the sensation that someone is whispering just behind them. The most commonly reported phrase is short and simple: "Ich bin hier," I am here. Others have described full sentences in German, French, or both, depending on who is listening. The voice is never loud. It stays low, intimate, as if directed only at the person hearing it. Though the identity of the speaker remains unknown, local researchers believe the whispers may be tied to a young German soldier who died in the accidental explosion inside Fort Douaumont in May 1916. Fragments of a letter written in blood were recovered from a damaged canteen found during post-war excavation. The message was addressed to a mother. The soldier was never identified. In 2009, a group of historians and technicians conducted an overnight sound analysis in the corridor. Their equipment captured low-frequency murmurs consistent with human speech, despite the area being completely sealed. No security footage showed movement. During the session, one technician collapsed and later described an overwhelming pressure in his chest and a voice saying his own name. Tourists report strange emotions after walking the corridor alone. Some break down crying without understanding why. Others report hearing names whispered that are personally significant names they had not spoken aloud during their visit. The whispering wall does not frighten in the traditional sense. Instead, it leaves behind a deep sense of sorrow. It is as if the dead are still trying to speak, asking not to be left behind in silence. In November 2022, a French documentary crew known as Spectres de Guerre was granted overnight access to Côte 304, one of the bloodiest high points outside Verdun. Armed with thermal drones, electromagnetic sensors, and high-sensitivity audio equipment, they intended to document environmental changes in the region often associated with paranormal claims. What they captured instead was something far beyond their expectations. Around 3:15 a.m., a drone launched over the northern slope began transmitting a sequence of heat signatures, clearly human-shaped forms, roughly 10 in number, spaced evenly apart. They moved in formation, pacing steadily across the lower ridge, before stopping in unison. There were no physical persons in the area at the time. Infrared picked up no temperature anomalies on the ground itself. The signatures lingered for nearly 20 seconds before fading abruptly. Moments later, the sound technician monitoring live audio feeds captured a chilling sequence. Through the white noise came distant rumblings, rhythmic, unmistakably like artillery fire. Then, a long, high-pitched scream. The voice was male. It was followed by silence. The location was entirely empty. Within minutes, 3 of the 5 crew members began to experience sudden symptoms: nausea, intense headaches, disorientation. Their batteries drained completely. The lead camera operator, Julian Morrill, collapsed near the hill's center. When revived, he said only one thing: they were marching. The footage was reviewed by multiple third-party analysts. No environmental explanation was found. Experts confirmed the thermal signatures did not correspond to any known heat sources or weather conditions. The event delayed the release of the documentary for nearly 8 months. When it did air, the Verdun segment was shortened and stripped of specific times and coordinates. Director Estelle Bonneau later explained, "There are places that do not want to be recorded. Verdun is one of them. It watches you while you watch it." Today, the Douaumont Ossuary and the surrounding battlefield remain solemn, preserved, and deeply respected. Visitors arrive year-round, drawn by history, tribute, or a personal need to witness the land where so many lives were lost. Yet even in daylight, certain areas carry a presence that is difficult to dismiss. Guides keep their routes focused, avoiding detours. Some sections are never mentioned on the official maps. The staff do not speak openly about it, but there are places they simply do not enter after dark. One such location is a small chamber beneath the ossuary, originally designed as part of a ventilation system. It was sealed off permanently in 1994 after repeated reports of power loss and unexplained noises. A maintenance worker at the time claimed that tools would be found moved, and lights refused to stay on for more than a few minutes. The final incident involved a group of architecture students on a supervised visit. One of them fainted inside the chamber and awoke repeating phrases in German. though she did not speak the language. Along the outer trenches near Fort Douaumont, warning signs discourage entry after sundown. Local residents avoid the site entirely at night. One former groundskeeper, who asked not to be named, said simply, "The night belongs to them. We leave it that way." In recent years, renovations near the ossuary unearthed several unexploded shells and fragments of uniforms still embedded in the earth. With each discovery, staff have quietly noted an increase in electrical failures, malfunctioning alarms, and even shattered glass within display cases. Technicians find no mechanical cause. Some believe disturbing these remains, no matter how unintentional, reawakens what the ground is trying to forget. Despite its beauty and reverence, Verdun is not at rest. The architecture is pristine, the lawns are trimmed, but the air carries something older, something watching, something waiting. It is a place that honors the dead, yes, but it is also a place where they are never entirely gone. Verdun is more than a battlefield. It is more than a memorial. It is a wound in the earth that has never fully closed. Beneath the moss and the marble lie thousands who died with no one to witness their final breath. Their names are lost, their graves uncertain, but the energy they left behind remains woven into the soil. You do not walk alone in Verdun. Even in silence, something lingers. The stories told here are not legends crafted in shadow. They are quiet moments caught at the edge of vision, voices trapped in stone, and footsteps that never reach their end. What haunts this place is not evil. It is the weight of memory, the echo of orders never fulfilled, the grief of lives interrupted mid-sentence. The battlefield itself breathes with the unresolved. Perhaps it is not anger that speaks through the walls of the ossuary, or pain that causes screams to rise from the soil. Perhaps it is recognition, a plea. The voices of men who fought and fell, still waiting for someone to hear them, still hoping to be seen. In a place where so many were forgotten, the haunting is not just spiritual, it is human. It asks us not to fear, but to remember, not to flee, but to listen. What if some places never forget? What if some wounds, once opened, do not close? In Verdun, the past is not buried, it walks with you. If you have felt something in a place of sorrow, heard a voice that should not have been there, or walked through silence that felt like mourning, share your story in the comments below. Some memories are waiting to be told. And if you believe the dead still speak, then subscribe. Listen closely. They already are.